Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey, everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese. Ghostly Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you a story called Qing Feng. In Taiyuan, there was a family surnamed Geng. Originally, their family was of the gentry class, so their ancestral home was spacious and grand. However, over time, the Geng family's influence gradually declined, and many of their houses stood empty and uninhabited. Consequently, strange and eerie occurrences began to take place in their ancestral home. For instance, the doors of the main hall often opened and closed by themselves without any apparent reason. This frightened the family members, causing them to scream in the middle of the night. Troubled by these events, the old master of the Geng family decided to move to their villa, leaving an old man to guard the ancestral home. From then on, the ancestral home became even more desolate and dilapidated. However, occasionally, sounds of merriment and laughter could still be heard coming from inside. The old master had a nephew named Geng Zhubing, who had a bold and carefree personality. When he left, he instructed the old man guarding the home to inform him if any more bizarre incidents occurred. One night, the old man guarding the ancestral home saw flickering candlelight in the upper part of the mansion. He hurriedly ran to the villa to inform Geng Zhubing. Geng Zhubing, full of curiosity, decided to investigate the strange occurrence. The old man strongly advised against it, but Geng Zhubing was determined. Geng Zhubing was familiar with the layout of the mansion, so he made his way through the overgrown weeds, navigating his way into the building. As he entered the mansion, everything seemed normal, but as he walked through, he heard soft voices coming from a room. Geng Zhubing approached quietly and found the room illuminated as if it were daytime. Inside, an elderly man wearing a scholar's hat sat facing south, engaged in a conversation with an elderly woman who sat opposite him. Both appeared to be in their 40s. Facing east, there was a young man who seemed to be in his 20s, with a young girl about 15 or 16 sitting to his right. The table inside was filled with food and drink, and the four individuals were happily conversing. Geng Zhubing suddenly entered the room and exclaimed, "An uninvited guest has arrived." This startled the occupants, and they all stood up, trying to escape, except for the elderly man. The elderly man stood up and scolded Geng Zhubing, asking who he was and why he had intruded into their private chambers. Geng Zhubing responded with curiosity. "This was originally my family's private chambers, and you and your family are occupying it now. You have laid out fine food and drink without inviting the master of this mansion. Isn't that being too stingy?" The elderly man scrutinized Geng Zhubing and said, "You are not the master of the Geng family." Geng Zhubing laughed and introduced himself, saying, "I am Geng Zhubing, the old master's nephew." Then, the old man respectfully invited Geng Zhubing to sit down and had another table of food and drinks brought over. The elderly man poured a drink for Geng Zhubing and invited him to drink. Geng Zhubing responded, Since we are all living under the same roof, I see no need for the guests to leave. Let's have a drink together." The elderly man was grateful and called for his son, saying, "Shower, come in." Shortly, the young man entered the room and introduced himself as the elderly man's son. Those present all exchanged brief introductions regarding their family backgrounds. The elderly man said, "My surname is Hu, and my name is Yijuan." Geng Zubing was generally quite bold. He had a lively sense of humor, and Shower was also very charismatic. In their conversations, they couldn't help but admire and respect each other. Geng Zubing was 21 years old, 2 years older than Shower, so he referred to him as his younger brother. The old man asked Geng Zubing, "I've heard that your ancestors once wrote a biography called Tushan Chronicles. Do you know about it?" Geng Zubing replied, "Yes, I know." The old man said, "I am a descendant of the Tushan clan. After the Tang dynasty, we can still trace our family lineage, but nothing has been passed down from the 5 dynasties period. Could you please give us a brief lecture?" Geng Zubing proceeded to briefly recount the deeds of Tushan Fox woman, who assisted the Great Yu in flood control. Geng Zubing embellished and enhanced the narrative as he spoke, using eloquent language and vivid descriptions. The old man was delighted to hear the stories and said to Shower, "Today, we've had the privilege of hearing many stories we've never heard before. Geng Zubing is not a stranger, so let's invite your mother and Qing Feng to join us and learn about the merits of our ancestors." Shower rose, lifted the curtains, and entered the inner room. Soon after, the old lady and the young girl walked out together. Geng Zubing carefully observed the young girl, noticing her delicate figure and her bright, intelligent eyes. She possessed an extraordinary beauty rarely seen in this world. The old man pointed to the old lady and said, "This is my wife." Then he pointed to the young girl and continued, "She is named Qing Feng, my niece. Qing Feng is very intelligent. She remembers things she hears and sees for a long time without forgetting, which is why I invited her to listen as well." After discussing the family history of the Tushan clan, Geng Zubing began drinking but kept his gaze on the young girl. The girl noticed his attention and blushed, lowering her head. Geng Zubing discreetly used his foot to lightly tap Qing Feng's small foot under the table. Startled, Qing Feng withdrew her foot, but there was no sign of anger on her face. Geng Zubing's infatuation intensified, and he couldn't contain his emotions. He pounded the table and exclaimed, "If I could marry a wife like Qing Feng, I wouldn't trade it even if I could become a king." Seeing Geng Zubing becoming more intoxicated and his words becoming wilder, the old lady and the young girl rose together and quickly lifted the curtains, retreating to the inner room. Geng Zubing suddenly felt deeply disappointed. He bid farewell to the old man and returned to the villa. Back at the villa, he remained haunted by his longing for Qing Feng. The following night, Geng Zubing returned to the mansion. He could still catch the scent of orchids and musk inside the room. He waited attentively through the night, but the mansion remained silent, without any signs of life. In the early morning, Geng Zubing returned home and discussed with his wife. He wanted to move his whole family to live in the mansion, hoping to encounter Qing Feng again. However, his wife disagreed, so Geng Zubing decided to move into the mansion himself and study downstairs. Late at night, as he leaned against his desk, a disheveled and eerie figure suddenly entered. Its face was dark and it stared at Geng Zubing. Unfazed, Geng Zubing merely smiled and dipped his finger in the inkwell, smearing ink on his own face. He then locked eyes with the ghost. The ghost, finding this encounter less interesting, eventually floated away. Another day passed, and it was late at night. Geng Zubing had just blown out the candle and was about to go to sleep when he heard the sound of a door latch being moved behind the building. Suddenly, there was a bang, and the door swung open. He quickly got up to peer outside, and he saw the door partially open. After a moment, Geng Zubing heard the sound of light footsteps, and a beam of candlelight emerged from the room. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was Qing Feng who walked out. Startled, Qing Feng took a few steps back upon seeing Geng Zubing, closing 2 doors behind her. Geng Zubing knelt outside the door, unable to get up. He said to Qing Feng, "I'm not afraid of the dangers here. I've been waiting here for a long time, all because of you, Qing Feng. Luckily, there's no one else here. If we can hold hands and share a laugh, I can die without regrets." The young girl, inside the room, replied, "I know your sincere feelings for me. But my uncle's rules are very strict, and I dare not obey your request." Geng Zubing continued to plead, "I don't dare hope for an intimate relationship with you. I'm satisfied as long as you open the door and let me see you for a moment." The young woman seemed to accept his plea, opened the door, grabbed his arm, and pulled him inside. Geng Zubing was ecstatic and followed Qing Feng into the room. He held her on his lap, and they cuddled together. Qing Feng said, "Thank goodness for the fate we had in our past lives. After this night, our yearning for each other will be in vain." Geng Zubing asked, "What's the reason for that?" Qing Feng replied, "My uncle was afraid of your wild and unrestrained character, so last night, he pretended to be a malevolent ghost to scare you. But he didn't expect that you would remain unfazed. Now, he has found another house and is in the process of moving there with his family. I'm the only one left here to look after things, and I'll be leaving tomorrow." After this revelation, Qing Feng was about to leave. She told Geng Zubing, "I'm afraid my uncle will return soon." Geng Zubing once again stopped her and attempted to seduce her, seeking intimate moments in bed. While the two were arguing and tussling, the old man suddenly entered unexpectedly. Qing Feng was overwhelmed with shame and fear. She was humiliated, her head hung low, and she leaned against the edge of the bed, twiddling with her belt, remaining silent. The old man scolded her angrily, saying, "You wretched girl, tarnishing our family's reputation. If you don't leave right away, I'll whip you." Qing Feng hurriedly left with her head down, and the old man followed her out. Geng Zubing quickly followed them to eavesdrop. He heard the old man relentlessly berating Qing Feng and even caught a glimpse of her sobbing softly. Geng Zubing's heart ached as if cut by a knife, and he shouted loudly to the old man, "The blame is all on me. It has nothing to do with Qing Feng. If you can forgive her, even if you punish me severely, I am willing to bear the consequences." After a long while, the house fell silent again, and Geng Zubing had no choice but to return to his room to sleep. From then on, no more strange sounds were heard in the house. When Geng Zubing's uncle heard about the incident, he found it quite intriguing. He was willing to sell the mansion to Geng Zubing at a reasonable price. Geng Zubing was delighted and moved his family into the mansion. They lived there comfortably for a year, but Geng Zubing continued to yearn for Qing Feng in his heart. One year, during the Qingming festival, Geng Zubing returned from visiting the graves of his ancestors. On the way home, he encountered two young foxes being relentlessly pursued by a dog. One of the foxes managed to escape, but the other was running frantically, clearly in distress. When this little fox saw Geng Zubing, it called out to him with an affectionate and pleading tone. Its ears drooped, and it huddled low as if it were beseeching Geng Zubing for help. Geng Zubing felt compassion for the little fox, so he unbuttoned his clothing and carefully picked it up, cradling it in his arms as he brought it back to his home. Upon arriving home, Geng Zubing shut the door and placed the little fox on his bed. To his astonishment, the small fox transformed into Qing Feng. Geng Zubing was overjoyed and quickly approached her to express his concern. Qing Feng explained, "Just now, I was playing with one of the maidservants when we suddenly encountered this dire calamity. If it weren't for you, I would surely have become the prey of the hound. I hope you won't despise me because I'm not of your kind." In response, Geng Zubing said, "I have been yearning for you day and night, even in my dreams. Now that I see you in person, you are like a priceless treasure to me. How can I harbor any disdain for you?" Qing Feng expressed, "Our meeting today was destined by fate. Had it not been for this calamity, how could we be together now? I'm fortunate that my maidservant likely believes I have perished, so I can stay with you forever." Delighted by this, Geng Zubing quickly prepared a separate residence for her to live in. And so, more than 2 years passed. One night, while Geng Zubing was engrossed in his studies, Shower suddenly burst into the room. Surprised, Geng Zubing set aside his books and inquired about his unexpected visit. Shao knelt before him, a look of sadness in his eyes, and said, "Father has suddenly fallen into a grave misfortune, and only you can save him. He had initially intended to come to you personally, but fearing your rejection, he sent me to plead on his behalf." Geng Zubing asked, "What has happened?" Shower said, "Do you know Mo Sanlang?" Geng Zubing responded, "He is the nephew of a friend who took the imperial examination in the same year as me." Shower continued, Tomorrow, he will be passing through here, and if he carries a hunted fox with him, you must insist on keeping it. Geng Zubing replied. I have a vivid recollection of the humiliation your father heaped upon me that day in the building downstairs. I bear no grudges for other matters, but if I must help with this matter, it is essential for Feng to come forward and persuade me. Tears streaming down his face, Xiao said. My sister Feng has been deceased in the wilderness for 3 years now. Geng Zubing waved his sleeves in anger and said. In that case, I despise him even more. With that, he picked up his books and began reciting them loudly, no longer paying attention to Xiao, who helplessly stood and, sobbing, covered his face and fled. Geng Zubing promptly went to Feng's residence and told her what had transpired. Hearing this, Feng was shocked and asked, Will you save him? Geng Zubing replied, I will still help. I didn't agree immediately earlier, it was only to get back at your uncle's previous rudeness. Feng felt relieved and said, I've been an orphan from a young age, and it's thanks to my uncle's care that I grew up. Despite the punishments he has meted out, I understand that it is due to the rules of our family. Geng Zubing acknowledged. Indeed, it is so. However, his actions have always left a deep-seated resentment in my heart. If you were truly gone, I would never save him. With a smile, Feng replied. You really can be quite vengeful. The following day, as expected, Mo Sanlang passed through here while hunting. He was riding a horse adorned with a golden chest belt and had a tiger skin quiver slung over his shoulder. He was accompanied by numerous attendants. Geng Zubing stood at the doorway to welcome him. Upon examining many birds and animals Mo Sanlang had caught, he indeed found a black fox among them. The black fox had a lot of blood on its body, even to the point where its fur had turned blackish red. Geng Zubing touched the fox and pretended that his fur robe was damaged, hoping to obtain the fox's fur for repairs. Mo Sanlang readily agreed and presented the fox to him. Geng Zubing immediately handed the fox over to Feng and accompanied Mo Sanlang to drink. After the guest departed, Feng held the fox in her arms. It took 3 days for the black fox to regain consciousness, and it transformed back into the old man. When the old man saw Feng, he couldn't believe he was still in the mortal realm. Feng explained the whole story in detail. The old man immediately knelt before Geng Zubing, expressing his remorse and gratitude for his past mistakes. Then, he looked at Feng with joy and said, I always believed you were not dead, and now it's confirmed. Feng said to Geng Zubing, If you still care about me, could you lend us that mansion? This way, I can repay my uncle for raising me. To their surprise, Geng Zubing readily agreed. After thanking Geng Zubing and saying their farewells, the old man left. That night, the entire Fox family moved into the mansion. From that point on, the two families lived together in the mansion with a relationship as close as that of parents and children. There was no more suspicion or ill will. Geng Zubing often stayed in his study, and Xiao'er came to drink and converse with him. Later on, as Geng Zubing's legitimate son grew, Geng Zubing asked Xiao'er to be his teacher. Xiao'er gently guided the child, exhibiting the qualities of a great mentor. Alright. That's all for today's ghostly tale. Qing Feng. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.